Kate Middleton had always known this day would come, but nothing could have prepared her for the weight of what she was about to face. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as she sat in her private study, her hands trembling slightly as she held the letter that had arrived just hours before. The royal seal was unmistakable, and the contents would change everything. The letter bore news that would shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. Her father-in-law, King Charles, had received devastating medical results. The cancer that had been quietly battling in the shadows had taken an aggressive turn. The doctors were clear in their assessment. Time was running short, and difficult decisions lay ahead. Kate's mind raced back to the conversation she'd had with William just the night before. They had been discussing their children's upcoming school events, the ordinary concerns of any parent. George had a football match, Charlotte was excited about her art exhibition, and little Louis was learning to play the piano. These simple moments of family life seemed so precious now, knowing how quickly everything could change. The palace staff moved quietly through the corridors, their usual chatter replaced by hushed whispers. News traveled fast within these ancient walls, even when official announcements hadn't been made. Kate could see it in their eyes, the concern, the uncertainty about what lay ahead for the royal family. As the Princess of Wales, Kate had grown accustomed to public scrutiny. But this felt different. This wasn't about fashion choices or public appearances. This was about the very heart of the monarchy, about a family facing an unimaginable loss, and about her role in supporting not just her husband, but an entire nation that would soon need comfort and stability. She walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where her children often played. The roses were in full bloom, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the heaviness she felt in her heart. She thought about all the times Charles had walked these same paths, sharing stories about his own childhood, teaching her grandchildren, about the history that surrounded them. The relationship between Kate and her father-in-law had deepened significantly over the years. What had started as formal royal protocol had evolved into genuine affection and mutual respect. Charles had been there to guide her through the complexities of royal life, offering wisdom gained from decades of service. He had seen her grow, from a nervous young woman thrust into the spotlight to a confident princess who had found her own voice and purpose. Her phone buzzed with a message from William. He was at the hospital with his father, and the gravity of the situation was becoming clearer by the hour. The medical team was being honest about the challenges ahead, and difficult conversations were taking place about the future of the monarchy. These weren't discussions any family should have to face, but the royal family carried responsibilities that extended far beyond their personal grief. Kate knew that in the coming days, weeks, and months, she would need to be stronger than she had ever been before. The British people would look to the royal family for stability and reassurance during this uncertain time. Children across the nation would have questions about their beloved king, and families would need to see that even in the face of such profound loss, life would continue with dignity and hope. She picked up a photograph from her desk, a candid shot taken during last year's Christmas celebration at Sandringham. Charles was laughing at something Louis had said, his eyes twinkling with genuine joy. In that moment, he wasn't the King of England. He was simply a grandfather delighting in his grandchild's innocence. These were the memories that would sustain the family through the dark days ahead. The weight of royal duty had never felt heavier. Kate understood that her personal grief would need to be balanced with public responsibility. There would be state functions to attend, charitable obligations to fulfill, and countless appearances where she would need to project strength and composure even when her heart was breaking. As she prepared to leave for the hospital, Kate made a silent promise to herself and to Charles. She would honor his legacy not just through formal ceremonies and official duties, but through the everyday moments of kindness, service, and dedication that he had modeled throughout his life. She would ensure that his grandchildren remembered not just the king he was, but the loving grandfather who had shaped their understanding of duty, compassion, and service to others. The journey to the hospital felt longer than usual, each mile, bringing her closer to a reality she wasn't ready to face. But Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, knew that, ready or not, she would need to find the strength to support her family and her nation through one of the most challenging periods in recent royal history. The car pulled up to the private entrance of the London hospital, where a small group of security personnel waited discreetly. Kate took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to face whatever lay ahead. She knew that this moment would mark the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the royal family, but for the entire United Kingdom. As she walked through the hospital corridors, Kate couldn't help but think about all the families around the world who were facing similar heartbreak in anonymous hospital rooms. In this moment of profound personal pain, she found a connection to the universal human experience of love, loss, and the courage required to keep moving forward when everything feels uncertain. The heavy doors to Charles's private room stood before her, and Kate paused for just a moment, knowing that once she stepped inside, nothing would ever be quite the same again. The hospital room was quieter than Kate had expected. Medical equipment hummed softly in the background, but the atmosphere felt strangely peaceful. Charles sat propped up in bed, his face pale, but his eyes still bright with the intelligence and warmth that had always defined him. William stood by the window, his shoulders tense with the weight of conversations that no son should have to have with his father. "Kate, my dear," Charles said softly, his voice carrying that familiar tone of affection that had always made her feel truly welcome in the family. "I'm so glad you're here." She moved to his bedside, taking his hand in hers. It felt smaller than she remembered, more fragile, but his grip was still firm. "How are you feeling?" she asked, though she knew the question was inadequate for the magnitude of what they were facing. "I've been better," he replied with a weak smile that reminded her of the dry humor he often displayed during family dinners. "But I've also been thinking a great deal about what lies ahead, not just for me, but for all of us." The doctor had left just minutes before Kate's arrival, having delivered the latest update to William. The treatment options were limited, and while they weren't giving up hope, everyone in the room understood that they were facing a fight that might not be won. The medical team was focused on comfort and quality of life, ensuring that Charles could continue his royal duties for as long as possible while managing his condition. William turned from the window, his face showing the strain of trying to balance his roles as son, husband, father, and future king. "We've been discussing the transition plans," he said quietly. "Father wants to ensure everything is in place so that the monarchy can continue to serve the people effectively, regardless of what happens." Kate felt a chill run through her as the reality of those words settled in. They weren't just talking about a beloved family member's illness. They were discussing the future of an institution that had stood for over 1,000 years. The weight of history, tradition, and public service pressed down on all of them in that sterile hospital room. Charles squeezed Kate's hand gently. "I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become, the princess you are, and the queen you will one day be," he said. "You've brought such joy to our family, and you've shown the British people what it means to serve with grace and authenticity." Tears welled up in Kate's eyes, but she fought to keep her composure. "You've taught me so much," she replied, "about duty, about finding purpose in service, about balancing public responsibility with private happiness." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. An aide entered quietly, carrying a folder of documents that required the king's attention. Even here, in this private moment of family crisis, the business of running a nation continued. Charles reviewed the papers with the same careful attention he had always given to his duties, signing where necessary and asking thoughtful questions about various matters of state. Kate watched this display of dedication with a mixture of admiration and sadness. Here was a man facing his own mortality, yet still committed to serving his people until the very end. It was a powerful reminder of what royal duty truly meant, not just the glamorous appearances and ceremonial occasions, but the daily, often unseen work of supporting the constitutional framework that underpinned British democracy. "The children?" Charles said suddenly, looking at both William and Kate. "We need to think about how to help them understand what's happening. They're still so young, but they deserve to know the truth in a way they can process." This was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the entire situation. George, Charlotte, and Louis had formed such close bonds with their grandfather. He had been the one to teach George about the history of the monarchy, showing him portraits of past kings and explaining the weight of the crown that would one day rest on his young shoulders. Charlotte often sought out her grandfather for art lessons, and Louis never failed to make Charles laugh with his endless curiosity and boundless energy. "They know something is different," William admitted. "George asked me yesterday why we've been having so many serious conversations lately. He's perceptive for his age." Kate nodded, remembering how George had seemed unusually quiet during breakfast that morning. Children had an uncanny ability to sense when the adults around them were carrying heavy burdens, even when those adults tried their best to maintain normalcy. "I think we should tell them together," Charles suggested. "Not everything, of course, but enough so they understand that Grandpapa is sick and that we all need to spend more time together as a family. They should have the opportunity to create more memories, to ask questions, to say the things that matter." The afternoon passed slowly, with family members taking turns spending quiet time with Charles. Kate found herself thinking about all the conversations they'd had over the years, about her struggles to adapt to royal life, about the challenges of raising children in the public eye, about finding ways to use their platform to make a positive difference in the world. She remembered the early days of her marriage, when she had felt overwhelmed by the expectations and protocols of royal life. Charles had been patient and understanding, sharing stories of his own experiences as a young royal trying to find his place in the world. He had encouraged her to find causes she was passionate about, to use her voice to advocate for issues she cared deeply about. As evening approached, Kate knew she would need to return home to the children. They would be expecting their normal bedtime routine, and she wanted to maintain as much stability as possible in their daily lives while the adult world around them dealt with this crisis. Before leaving, she spent a few more minutes alone with Charles. They talked about the upcoming royal calendar, about charitable events that were important to him, about his hopes for the future of the monarchy. Even facing his own mortality, Charles was thinking about legacy, about ensuring that the institutions and causes he had championed would continue to thrive. "Promise me something," he said as Kate prepared to leave. "Promise me that you'll remember to find joy in the small moments, even when the weight of duty feels overwhelming. The crown brings responsibilities, but it shouldn't steal the happiness from your life," Kate promised, knowing that in the difficult days ahead, she would need to hold on to that wisdom and share it with her own children as they grew into their roles within the royal family. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave Kate precious time to collect her thoughts before facing her children. The London streets were bustling with evening commuters, people hurrying home to their families, completely unaware that just miles away, one of the most significant transitions in British history was beginning to unfold. Kate envied their normalcy, their ability to worry about ordinary things like dinner plans and weekend activities. When she arrived home, the familiar sounds of family life greeted her. Charlotte practicing piano in the music room, George's excited voice as he recounted his day at school, and Louis's infectious laughter echoing from somewhere upstairs. For a moment, Kate stood in the entrance hall, breathing in the comfort of her children's voices and trying to memorize this feeling of home and safety. Maria, their trusted nanny, approached with a gentle smile. "They've been asking when you'd be back," she said quietly. George seemed particularly concerned. He's very intuitive for his age. Kate nodded, knowing that her eldest son had inherited his father's sensitivity to the moods and tensions of those around him. "Let's gather them in the sitting room," she said. "William should be home soon, and we need to talk to them together." The next hour was one of the most difficult Kate had ever experienced as a mother. She and William sat with their 3 children, searching for words that would explain the unexplainable. How do you tell a 10-year-old that his beloved grandfather, the king, is very sick? How do you help an 8-year-old understand that the person who taught her to paint watercolors might not be there for her next birthday? How do you comfort a 5-year-old who just wants to know when Grandpapa will come play football again? George, true to his nature, asked the hardest questions. "Is Grandpapa going to die?" he asked with the directness that only children possess. The question hung in the air like a weight, demanding honesty, even when honesty felt cruel. William took a deep breath. "Grandpapa is very sick, George. The doctors are doing everything they can to help him feel better, but we don't know what will happen. What we do know is that he loves all of us very much, and he wants to spend as much time as possible with our family." Charlotte, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly burst into tears. "But he promised to help me with my art project for school," she sobbed. "He said we were going to paint the gardens at Windsor together." Kate gathered her daughter into her arms, feeling her own heart break at the simple devastation in Charlotte's voice. "We'll make sure you still get to paint with Grandpapa," she promised. "Maybe we can set up an easel in his room, or he can come visit when he's feeling well enough." Louis, perhaps too young to fully grasp the gravity of the situation, focused on the practical concerns that mattered most to his small world. "Can Grandpapa still read me stories?" he asked. "He does the best dragon voices." "I'm sure he'd love to read you stories," Kate replied, making a mental note to arrange for Charles to record some of Louis's favorite tales, knowing that these recordings might become precious keepsakes in the future. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with the children asking questions, expressing fears, and gradually beginning to process this new reality. Kate was struck by their resilience, their ability to accept difficult truths while still maintaining their essential childhood optimism. They made plans to visit Grandpapa the next day, to bring him drawings and perhaps perform a little concert, to cheer him up. After the children were settled for the night, Kate and William found themselves alone in their private sitting room, finally able to speak freely about the magnitude of what they were facing. The official diagnosis hadn't been made public yet, but they knew it was only a matter of time before the news would break and the entire world would be watching their family navigate this crisis. "The Prime Minister called while you were with the children," William said quietly. "They're preparing contingency plans, updating protocols, reviewing the succession procedures. It feels so clinical, so removed from the fact that we're talking about my father." Kate reached for her husband's hand, feeling the tension in his fingers. "How are you holding up with all of this?" William was quiet for a long moment. "I keep thinking about how young I was when Mum died, how unprepared I felt for the world of adult grief and public mourning. I don't want our children to go through that same experience, but I also know I can't protect them from everything." The weight of their unique circumstances pressed down on them both. Unlike other families dealing with serious illness, their grief would be public, their mourning would be scrutinized, and their healing would happen under the relentless gaze of media attention. Every tear, every moment of vulnerability, every step of their journey would be analyzed and interpreted by millions of people around the world. "We need to think about how to handle the public announcement," Kate said, her mind already working through the logistics of what would be one of the most significant royal communications in decades. "The people deserve to hear this news from us, not from leaked reports or speculation in the tabloids." They discussed the delicate balance between transparency and privacy, between the public's right to know about their monarch's health and the family's need for space to process their grief. There would be official statements from Buckingham Palace, medical bulletins, and carefully crafted communications designed to inform the nation while maintaining dignity and hope. The phone rang constantly throughout the evening. Calls from other members of the royal family, government officials, and close friends who had heard rumors and wanted to offer support. Each conversation required Kate and William to retell their story, to explain the medical situation, and to accept condolences for a loss that hadn't yet occurred but felt increasingly inevitable. Late that night, after the last call had been answered and the final email had been sent, Kate found herself standing in the nursery doorway, watching Louis sleep peacefully in his small bed. His face was serene, innocent of the weight that would soon rest on his young shoulders as the third, in line to the throne. She wondered what kind of world he would inherit, what kind of king he might become, and whether she and William would be able to prepare him for the responsibilities that awaited him. The next morning brought a new set of challenges. The children woke with questions they hadn't thought of the night before. George wondered if he would still become king someday. Charlotte wanted to know if royal duties would change, and Louis asked if they could bring Grandpapa his favorite, biscuits, when they visited. As Kate helped her children prepare for school, trying to maintain their normal routine while processing this extraordinary situation, she realized that this was just the beginning. The days and weeks ahead would test their family in ways they had never imagined, requiring strength, grace, and unity in the face of public scrutiny and private heartbreak. The morning news programs were already beginning to speculate about unusual activity at Buckingham Palace, noting the increased security presence and the canceled public appearances. Kate knew it was only a matter of time before their carefully guarded family crisis became international headline news, changing everything about how they could process their grief and navigate this difficult journey. 3 weeks had passed since that first devastating conversation in the hospital, and the royal family had settled into a new rhythm of uncertainty. The official announcement had been made to the nation, delivered with the careful language of medical bulletins and royal protocol, but everyone who heard it understood the gravity of what was happening. King Charles III was fighting for his life, and the British people were holding their breath alongside the royal family. Kate had thrown herself into supporting both her immediate family and the broader institution of the monarchy. Her days were filled with rearranged schedules, emergency meetings, and the delicate task of maintaining public confidence while dealing with private anguish. She had taken on additional royal duties as Charles's health fluctuated, stepping in for engagements he could no longer fulfill. The children had adapted to their new reality with the remarkable resilience that children possess. They had established a routine of visiting their grandfather several times a week, bringing artwork, school projects, and endless questions that seemed to brighten Charles's spirits even on his most difficult days. George had become particularly protective of his younger siblings, explaining complicated situations in terms they could understand, and helping them process their fears about losing someone they loved so deeply. This particular morning felt different. Kate woke with an unusual sense of anticipation, though she couldn't quite identify why. The autumn air was crisp, and golden sunlight streamed through the windows of Kensington Palace, creating patterns on the floor that reminded her of the first time she had walked through these rooms as William's new bride, nervous and hopeful about the life that lay ahead. Her phone buzzed with a message from William, who had spent the night at the hospital. "Good morning. Father had a restful night. The doctors seem cautiously optimistic today. He's asking for you and the children." Kate felt a flutter of hope in her chest. Charles had been having more good days lately, moments when his energy returned, and his eyes sparkled with their familiar intelligence and humor. The medical team had explained that this was often part of the journey with serious illness. periods of decline followed by unexpected rallies that could last days or even weeks. She gathered the children earlier than usual, explaining that Grandpapa was having a particularly good day and wanted to spend time with them. Charlotte had prepared a small painting of the gardens at Windsor, complete with the roses that Charles loved so much. George had written a short story about a brave king who fought dragons and always protected his people. Louis, with the help of his nanny, had learned a new song on his toy piano that he was excited to perform. The drive to the hospital felt different this time. Instead of the heavy silence that had characterized their recent journeys, the children chattered excitedly about their plans for the visit. Kate found herself smiling genuinely for the first time in weeks, caught up in their infectious optimism and their simple faith that love could overcome any obstacle. When they arrived at Charles's private suite, Kate was amazed by the transformation. Her father-in-law was sitting up in a comfortable chair by the window, dressed in his own clothes rather than hospital attire. His color was better, and when he smiled at the sight of his grandchildren, Kate saw glimpses of the vibrant man who had welcomed her into the family all those years ago. "My dear ones," Charles said, opening his arms to embrace the children who rushed to his side. "You've brought sunshine into this dreary old place." The next few hours were magical in a way that Kate hadn't expected. Charles listened intently to each child's stories and achievements, asked thoughtful questions about their schoolwork, and seemed genuinely energized by their presence. He examined Charlotte's painting with the serious attention of an art critic, declared George's story worthy of publication, and applauded enthusiastically for Louis's musical performance. During a quiet moment while the children were arranging flowers that had arrived from well-wishers around the world, Charles took Kate's hand and spoke softly. "I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done these past weeks. You've held our family together while I've been unable to fulfill my duties. You've shown exactly the kind of strength and grace that will make you a remarkable queen someday." Kate felt tears prick her eyes. "You don't need to thank me. This is what families do for each other." "Ah, but we're not just any family, are we?" Charles replied with a gentle smile. "We carry responsibilities that extend far beyond our personal relationships. The way you've balanced caring for your own children while stepping in to support the monarchy, it's been extraordinary to witness." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. William had arrived with several members of the royal staff, and Kate could see from their expressions that something significant was happening. An aide approached Charles with obvious excitement, carrying official documents and wearing the kind of smile that suggested good news. "Your Majesty," the aide said formally, "we've just received word from Downing Street. The legislation you've been advocating for regarding mental health services has passed through Parliament with overwhelming support. The Prime Minister wanted you to know immediately." Charles's face lit up with genuine joy. This particular piece of legislation had been close to his heart for years, representing his long-standing commitment to improving mental health support across the United Kingdom. He had worked tirelessly behind the scenes, using his influence to bring attention to the issue and to encourage lawmakers to take meaningful action. "This is wonderful news," Charles said, his voice stronger than Kate had heard it in weeks. "Think of all the families who will benefit from improved services, all the young people who will have access to the support they need." Kate watched her father-in-law's reaction with deep admiration. Even while facing his own mortality, Charles's first thought was for the people he served. This was the essence of royal duty that he had tried to teach her. The understanding that personal circumstances, no matter how difficult, should never overshadow the commitment to public service. The children sensed the adults' excitement and gathered around their grandfather's chair, curious about what had caused such celebration. Charles explained the legislation in terms they could understand, talking about how sometimes grown-ups needed help when they felt sad or worried, and how the new law would make it easier for people to get that help. "Like when I was scared about you being sick and Mummy helped me talk about my feelings?" Charlotte asked with the directness that always surprised adults. Exactly like that, my darling, Charles replied, pulling her close. Sometimes talking about our worries with someone who understands can make us feel much better. As the afternoon progressed, Kate realized she was witnessing something remarkable. Despite the uncertainty about Charles's health, despite the weight of royal duty and public expectation, their family was finding moments of genuine joy and connection. The children were learning lessons about resilience, about finding hope in difficult circumstances, and about the importance of cherishing time with the people they loved. The medical team arrived for their scheduled check, and Kate was encouraged by their positive assessment. While they remained cautiously optimistic, the doctors noted improvements in several key areas and suggested that Charles might soon be well enough to return to Windsor Castle for a period of recovery at home. This news filled Kate with a hope she had been afraid to feel. The possibility of Charles spending time in familiar surroundings, surrounded by the gardens and rooms that held decades of happy memories, seemed like the perfect prescription for continued healing. Windsor Castle had never felt more like home than it did on the crisp November morning when Charles returned from the hospital. Kate stood at one of the grand windows in the oak drawing room, watching as the royal convoy made its way up the long drive. The ancient stones of the castle seemed to welcome their returning monarch, and even the autumn sky appeared to have cleared just for this moment. The past month had been a whirlwind of cautious optimism and careful planning. Charles's recovery had been slow but steady, and his medical team had finally agreed that he was stable enough to continue his treatment from the comfort of Windsor. The decision had lifted everyone's spirits, particularly the children, who had missed their grandfather's presence in the familiar setting where so many of their happiest family memories had been created. Kate had spent weeks preparing for this homecoming, working with the household staff to ensure that Charles would have everything he needed for both his recovery and his continued royal duties. A private suite had been arranged on the ground floor to minimize stairs, complete with all the medical equipment that might be required. More importantly, it overlooked the rose gardens that had always been Charles's favorite retreat. As the cars pulled up to the main entrance, Kate felt her heart lift at the sight of Charles stepping out under his own power. He moved slowly and leaned on William's arm, but there was an unmistakable spark in his eyes as he looked up at the medieval towers and Gothic windows of his beloved castle. This was more than just a change of location. It was a symbol of hope and continuity. The children had been practically vibrating with excitement all morning. They had prepared a special welcome display in the grand reception room, complete with hand-drawn banners, carefully arranged flowers from the castle gardens, and a selection of Charles's favorite books arranged on a side table. Louis had even convinced the castle chef to prepare treacle tart, remembering that his grandfather had once mentioned it was his favorite dessert as a boy. "Grandpapa!" Charlotte exclaimed as Charles entered the reception room, rushing to his side, but remembering, at the last moment, to be gentle. "We've made everything perfect for you." Charles's face broke into the widest smile Kate had seen from him in months. "This is absolutely magnificent," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of delight that had always made family gatherings special. "I believe this is the finest welcome a king has ever received." George stepped forward with the formal bearing that reminded Kate so much of William at that age. "We wanted you to know that we're all very happy you're home, Grandpapa. We've missed having family dinners here, and Granny's portrait in the dining room looked lonely without you sitting beneath it." The reference to Queen Elizabeth brought a moment of poignant silence. Her portrait, painted during the Golden Jubilee celebrations, watched over the family dining room where she had presided over countless meals with her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Kate knew that Charles felt his mother's presence strongly in these rooms, and she hoped that connection would provide comfort during his recovery. The first few days at Windsor established a new rhythm for the family. Charles held his morning, meetings in the oak drawing room, where he could conduct royal business while enjoying views of the long walk stretching toward the great park. Kate often joined these sessions, continuing to take on additional responsibilities while learning more about the intricate workings of the monarchy. She was constantly amazed by the breadth of Charles's daily concerns. In a single morning, he might review reports on climate change initiatives, discuss Commonwealth relations with foreign office officials, approve charitable patronages, and review architectural plans for historic building restorations. Even while managing his health challenges, he remained deeply engaged with the issues that had defined his decades of public service. The children adapted quickly to having their grandfather back in residence. They developed a routine of visiting him each afternoon after school, sharing stories about their day and helping with small tasks that made them feel useful and important. Charlotte had appointed herself as Charles's official art instructor, bringing her watercolors to his sitting room and patiently teaching him techniques she had learned in her own lessons. George, always the most serious of the three children, had taken a particular interest in the historical aspects of his grandfather's role. He spent hours listening to Charles explain the significance of various ceremonies, the meaning behind different royal symbols, and the constitutional responsibilities that came with the crown. These conversations were preparing him in age-appropriate ways for the destiny that awaited him many years in the future. Louis, with his natural gift for bringing joy to any situation, had become Charles's unofficial entertainment committee. He performed daily concerts on his toy piano, told elaborate stories about imaginary adventures, and somehow managed to coax laughter from his grandfather even on the most difficult days. Kate found herself documenting these moments with new intensity. She took photographs of quiet afternoons in the castle library, of Charles helping the children with their homework, of family dinners where 4 generations gathered around tables that had hosted British royalty for centuries. She understood, perhaps more clearly than ever before, that she was witnessing history in the most personal way possible. One evening, as November rain drummed against the ancient windows, Kate found Charles alone in his study, reading official papers by lamplight. The scene reminded her of countless other evenings when she had seen him working late into the night, devoted to his duties even when no one was watching. "How are you feeling about everything?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. Charles looked up from his papers, his reading glasses perched on his nose in a way that made him look both distinguished and approachable. "Grateful," he said simply. "Grateful for this time, for the chance to be home, for the opportunity to see my grandchildren growing into such remarkable young people." "They adore you," Kate replied. "Charlotte told me yesterday that she wants to be just like Grandpapa when she grows up. Someone who helps people and makes the world more beautiful." Charles's eyes misted slightly. "That might be the finest compliment I've ever received." They talked for another hour about the children's futures, about the changes happening in the world, and about Charles's hopes for the monarchy in the decades to come. Kate realized that these conversations were more than casual family discussions. They were a form of education, a transfer of wisdom and institutional knowledge that could only happen through direct experience and personal relationship. As she prepared to leave, Charles reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a small, leather-bound journal. "I've been writing letters," he said quietly, "to each of the children, to you and William, to various people who have been important in my life. Not goodbye letters exactly, but thoughts I want to share, wisdom I hope might be useful. Someday." Kate felt her throat tighten with emotion. "That's a beautiful gift." "I hope they'll never need to read them," Charles said with a gentle smile. "But if someday they do, I want them to know how proud I am of who they're becoming, and how confident I am in their ability to carry on the best traditions of our family." That night, Kate lay awake thinking about legacy, about the countless ways that love and values passed from one generation to the next. and about the privilege of witnessing such profound grace in the face of uncertainty. The moment that would be remembered for generations arrived on a peaceful December morning at Westminster Abbey. The ancient cathedral was filled with dignitaries, world leaders, and ordinary citizens who had come to witness something unprecedented in modern royal history. A living king voluntarily passing the crown to his son, while surrounded by the love and support of his family and nation. Kate stood beside William in the front row, her hand resting gently on her heart as she watched Charles make his way slowly down the aisle. He moved with dignity, despite his physical frailty, his head held high and his eyes bright with purpose. This was not a ceremony born of tragedy or sudden loss, but rather a celebration of continuity, wisdom, and the enduring strength of the British monarchy. The decision had not come easily. Over the past months, as Charles's health had stabilized but remained fragile, he had engaged in countless conversations with constitutional experts, government officials, and, most importantly, with his family. The precedent was rare, but not without historical foundation. Other European monarchies had successfully navigated similar transitions, and Charles believed that stepping aside while he could still guide and support his successor was the greatest gift he could give to his people. "I want to see William crowned while I can still stand beside him and offer my blessing," he had explained to Kate during one of their evening conversations at Windsor. "I want to witness the beginning of his reign, not have it overshadowed by grief and uncertainty." The children sat between Kate and Camilla, their faces serious with the understanding that they were witnessing history. George, now old enough to fully comprehend the significance of the day, kept stealing glances at his father, perhaps imagining his own distant future when he might stand in the same position. Charlotte held a small bouquet of winter roses from the Windsor Gardens, a gift she planned to present to her grandfather after the ceremony. Louis, though trying his best to sit still, occasionally whispered questions to his mother about the elaborate rituals unfolding before them. The Archbishop of Canterbury's voice echoed through the vaulted spaces as he spoke about service, duty, and the sacred trust between monarch and people. These were themes that had defined Charles's entire life, and Kate could see the emotion in his eyes as he listened to words that had guided his understanding of kingship for over 7 decades. When the moment came for Charles to remove the crown, a hush fell over the entire cathedral. Kate felt her breath catch as she watched this most symbolic of acts. Charles lifted the St. Edward's crown from his head with steady hands, holding it for a moment as if committing the weight of it to memory. Then, with infinite care and unmistakable love, he placed it on William's bowed head. "My son," Charles said, his voice carrying clearly through the Abbey's perfect acoustics, "I pass to you not just a crown, but a sacred commitment to serve our people with humility, wisdom, and unwavering dedication. May you find in this responsibility the same joy and purpose that it has brought to my life." William's response was equally moving. "Father, I accept this trust with gratitude for your guidance, admiration for your service, and determination to honor the example you have set. May I prove worthy of the confidence you and our people place in me." Kate felt tears streaming down her face as she watched her husband become King William V. But these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pride, hope, and overwhelming love for both the man who was passing on his life's work and the man who was accepting the enormous responsibility of continuing it. The coronation ceremony continued with all the ancient rituals and modern adaptations that made such occasions both timeless and relevant. When the moment came for Kate to be crowned queen consort, she felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders along with the crown. She thought of all the queens who had come before her, of the lessons Charles had taught her about service and sacrifice, and of the children who would one day carry this legacy forward. As the ceremony concluded and the newly crowned King William and Queen Catherine emerged from Westminster Abbey, Kate was struck by the extraordinary nature of what had just occurred. Unlike so many royal transitions throughout history, this had been a celebration rather than a time of mourning. Charles, though stepping back from his formal role, would continue to live at Windsor, offering guidance and support while allowing his son to establish his own reign. The children rushed to their grandfather as soon as protocol allowed, surrounding him with hugs and excited chatter about the beautiful ceremony they had just witnessed. Charles gathered them close, his face radiant with joy despite his obvious fatigue from the day's events. "Are you still our grandpapa?" Louis asked with the directness that always made adults smile. "Forever and always," Charles assured him. "Being king was just my job. Being your grandfather is who I am." The weeks that followed the coronation established a new rhythm for the royal family. William threw himself into his duties as king with the dedication Kate had always admired, while she embraced her role as queen with growing confidence. Charles, now with the title of King Emeritus, found unexpected freedom in being able to focus on his personal passions without the constant pressure of state duties. He spent his days writing his memoirs, tending to his beloved gardens, and enjoying extended time with his grandchildren. The cottage at Highgrove became his primary residence, though he maintained apartments at Windsor for family gatherings and important occasions. Kate often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as one of the most frightening periods of their lives had evolved into something beautiful and unprecedented. Charles's illness had forced difficult conversations about mortality and legacy, but it had also created opportunities for deeper connections, honest reflections, and ultimately a transition that honored both tradition and innovation. The British people had embraced this unique arrangement with surprising enthusiasm. Polls showed overwhelming support for Charles's decision and strong confidence in William's ability to lead. The monarchy felt renewed and revitalized, bridging generational differences while maintaining its essential continuity. On Christmas morning at Sandringham, as 4 generations of the royal family gathered around the breakfast table, Kate observed the easy laughter and genuine affection that filled the room. Charles looked healthier than he had in months, his face bright with contentment as he helped Louis with a particularly challenging jigsaw puzzle. William was deep in conversation with George about a book they were reading together. Charlotte was showing Camilla her latest artistic creation. This, Kate realized, was what Charles had been fighting for all along. Not just his own life, but the preservation of family bonds that would sustain the monarchy through whatever challenges lay ahead. By choosing to step aside while he could still participate in and enjoy his family's future, he had given them all an extraordinary gift. As she watched her father-in-law's face light up with laughter at something Louis had said, Kate understood that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go, and that true legacy isn't measured in years on the throne, but in the values, wisdom, and affection that pass from one generation to the next. The hush that had descended during the coronation ceremony had been filled not with sadness, but with reverence for a love so deep it could transform even the most ancient traditions into something new and beautiful.